Last of Us Episode 5. I knew this was going to be a heavy one, but I still was kind of shocked by how they handled it. Episode 4 leaves off with a cliffhanger of Henry and Sam pointing their guns at Ellie and Joel, leading into Episode 5, where we see how they managed to cross paths with each other. It turns out Henry was a collaborator and a traitor of some kind for these group of rebels in Kansas City, hence why they're both on the run from Kathleen and her group of survivors. In the original game, when you cross paths with Henry and Sam, we don't really know a whole ton about them. We just know that they were part of this group of people that were trying to get through the city of Pittsburgh to look for supplies. Then they got ambushed by the hunters, and then they decided, okay, let's just get out of here. Let's not even bother trying to find stuff. This one, they change it up by making him a part of that group of citizens in Kansas City that rebelled against the military rule. At one point, when he and Sam are hiding, he overhears the ambush that was being used on Joel and Ellie, and he sees Joel taking out the hunters. And he decides that they can probably rely on this guy to get them both out of the city. When he meets up with them, there's obviously a good amount of tension, and he's able to slowly win over their trust by showing that how he knows the inner workings of the city, the underground sewer systems, and how they're able to sneak out at a certain area and get to the highway so that way they could be scot-free and nobody will even notice that they're gone. Points out that there probably is a lot of infected down there since the military buried them 15 years prior, but when they go down there, there isn't any infected. I kind of wanted to see at least 1 or 2 clickers or a runner running around, provide some kind of tension in the air. But then we get to that settlement, which we see in the sewers after we leave Pittsburgh, which if you pick up notes throughout that area, there's a whole backstory dedicated to how this guy named Ish went into this underground area of the sewers and created his own little community. But eventually someone got infected and it ended up wiping out the entire settlement. The same drawing that you find in the one classroom is used in this episode as well. Ellie and Sam, like in that area of the game, play a little bit of soccer, and at one point, Ellie learned sign language from Sam, how to say endure and survive. One of the most famous quotes from the series. And I like how they kind of poke fun at it with Joel saying, it's not that amazing. And I audibly said out loud as I was watching it, it has a certain catchiness to it. It's kind of like with great power comes great responsibility. But it's in this episode, in that moment in particular, where Joel slowly starts to let his walls down. We learn that Henry was originally with that group of survivors, and that he looked up to their original leader, Kathleen's brother, as a great person. But when his brother Sam got affected with leukemia, and he only could get 1 slab of medicine, basically sold out Kathleen's brother, which ended up getting him killed. A pretty big emotional beat that I did not anticipate at all. And it's very much in vein of what The Last of Us is really about, and I think that also is the entire thesis statement for Last of Us Part 2. What are you willing to do for the person that you care about the most? I'm not going to try to spoil anything as far as the ending of the first game, because I know some of you guys, if anyone's watching, if you've never played the games before, I'll keep those details to a bare minimum, but I really like how this game is tying the themes of both games together. Same thing with Kathleen, who basically lost all of her empathy and is so wrapped up in trying to find Henry and Sam for retribution. And Perry is trying to talk her down, saying, hey look, we all loved your brother, but maybe you're going too far here. Maybe you should just let this go. But it doesn't really matter for her. She wants revenge, nothing else will change it. Does that remind you of anyone? Another big change that caught me off guard, but I found to be really touching, was that Sam is not only younger than he was in the game, but he was also deaf. And this added a whole different level of emotion that I found so beautiful. We see more of the bond between him and Henry, and how, even though Sam is able to see that Henry's lying about their situation, Sam seems to like that he's the calming voice of optimism and hope for him. In a world where there's not really that much to hope for, you need some kind of guiding light for you somewhere. Giving us moments where Henry paints this little red stripe over Sam's eyes to give him that kind of a Super Sam or that superhero feel that he wants to have. It's such a small, beautiful moment that I found myself almost crying. Henry and Sam in the original game are very important for Joel and Ellie's bond to grow. Henry says to Joel at one point that, hey look, you look like you were somebody's father at one point in time. You might not be her father, but I know the look when I see it. Like I said earlier, playing into the themes of The Last of Us and what are you willing to do for the person you love the most. And this is what I think propels Joel to care very more deeply about Ellie. And that he's actually willing to let them come along with them to Wyoming to find Tommy. Because initially, he's obviously not really keen with letting a couple of strangers join them on their mission, because you don't really know what they're gonna do. But eventually they make their way to this neighborhood that they need to get to in order to make their getaway. And they get ambushed by that sniper when they're in the middle of the street, just like in the original game. Though this time it takes place at nighttime as opposed to the daytime. Henry, Sam, and Ellie get cornered by Kathleen and her group of survivors, and it looks like that they actually might be done for. But then when the one car that's on fire sinks into this hole in the ground, a callback / payoff to the collapsing floor in the previous episode, which I think myself and other people were correct to assume that there was going to be a bloater under there. But it turns out there was more to it than that. It was a giant horde of infected that springs up out of the ground, devouring almost everybody in their path. The way they popped out of the ground like that, walking on all fours or just running around, instantly took me right back to World War Z. I don't know if they were using any studio lighting in this sequence, but it looks like they were relying on the fire effects for the actual lighting, and it really does a great job of capturing the sense of horror that you feel when you see these insane disease maniacs coming at you, especially when the bloater comes out of the ground the way it does. And when the camera's focused on Perry as he hears the bloater coming, I love the effect that they use on slowing the frame rate, because it lets you as the audience know that something even scarier than the clickers and runners is coming in. The look of this thing is impeccable. Not to mention the sound effects from this thing, pulled exactly right out of the game. And even though we see it from a distance, the way he rips off Perry's head, just like you would see in those death cutscenes if the bloater got its hands on you, talk about brutality at its finest. And when I say finest, I mean its absolute grossest. At one point, Henry and Sam are trapped under this car and are being jumped on by a couple of infected, which is safe to assume that one of them got its teeth into Sam's leg, which we see later in the hotel room. And at one point, Ellie's trapped in this car, and we see this young kid that's a clicker using some kind of acrobatic move to jump over the seats to try to get her. And that same clicker ends up killing Kathleen. Even though I did feel some kind of sympathy for Kathleen's predicament, I just couldn't help but say when that clicker jumped on her, "Sayonara, sweetheart." But eventually they make their way to the hotel room, and Sam and Ellie are continuing to talk about those comic books that she has, and he asks her the question of, if I become one of those things, will the human part still be inside me? And how come you're not scared of anything? Just like in the original game, she tries to play it off as a joke that she's scared of scorpions, but then she sees that he's serious, and she confesses that she's scared of ending up alone, which is exactly what happens if you played the second game. And I really like how they played the reveal of him being infected, because in the original game it was a surprise. He shows Ellie the bite, and she decides to use her blood, trying to smear it onto his cut, to see if it might be able to heal him. So eventually when Sam turns and gets shot by Henry, she feels somewhat responsible for what happened. That another person she started to like and care for coming into her life had to pay the price and become infected. And with that in mind, I think it's more clear as to why she feels like her immunity matters, because of all the people that she's cared for, well, most of them anyway, that have come into her life have become infected. She feels like she couldn't save any of those people, but she could save all the other people that haven't been infected yet. So eventually when she wakes up the next morning and checks on Sam, he jumps her, tries to kill her. Joel tries to save her. Henry points the gun at him. He points the gun at Sam and shoots him dead. Just like in the original game, he's horrified by what he's done. And then he ends up killing himself right after. Just like with Sarah's death in the original game and in the pilot episode, any of us who play the game, we all knew what was coming. But even so, right when Henry points the gun at his head, it's almost like I was experiencing it for the first time all over again. I went, no! I have to give a round of applause for both the actors that played Henry and Sam. They were so likable and so sympathetic and endearing. And the way that the creators played these two characters into the progression of Joel and Ellie, it's really clear once we see them bury their bodies outside the hotel that Joel and Ellie are starting to become even closer. And Joel starts to see that he cares very deeply for Ellie, seeing how Henry was able to not live without his brother in this crazy world. He's starting to realize deep down, after he lost Sarah, he's now starting to see Ellie as his own daughter, and what happens at the possibility of losing her. Probably the most heartbreaking episode, even more than episode 3 with Bill and Frank, even though that episode in its own way was very emotionally powerful. It looks like in the next episode we're going to be arriving in Jackson and finding Tommy. Now how much of that episode will cover just Jackson, or if they're going to see some of them going into the Firefly lab where certain things happen with Joel and a pipe. You guys who played the original game, you'll know what I mean. I don't want to get too deep into that so much, and I realize that I probably spoiled a good chunk of it for you if you haven't played the game, but to anyone who hasn't played the game, I don't expect everybody to be into video games like some of us are, but if you could at least watch the footage online, you might actually be surprised with this one. But yeah, still really excited to see how they portray the rest of the events of the first game. And since I mentioned The Last of Us Part 2 in some ways, really curious to see how they're eventually going to portray Last of Us Part 2 when they adapt it eventually. Whether that'll be the next season or that'll probably be many seasons down the line, who knows. Either way, I'm still loving the respect and affinity for the source material that these creators are having. With Neil Druckmann in the same room, odds are there's going to be some kind of care and detail. Some people might gripe about the deviations from the original storyline. Well, so far at least, I don't care. What works in a video game and what doesn't work in a live-action television show. So those are my thoughts on episode 5. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.